Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in the OPSWAT Proven Deployments in Energy and Utilities. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit about what OPSWAT does, how we help our customers, talk about the marketplace, and really how we help customers be successful in the marketplace. First off, let me introduce myself. My name is Dennis Lanahan. I've been at OPSWAT for quite some time now. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for over 18 years with a very keen and specific focus on data diode solutions for network segmentation, both at a DMZ level as well as the cell area zones for OT security. James, how about a quick introduction by yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm James Turner. I'm a OT solution engineer with OPSWAT. I'm a CISSP. I am a ISA 62443 cybersecurity expert and a recipient of the Sans Asante Scholar Award. So I've been working in OT pretty much my whole life, which is about 30 years worth of career in one way, shape, or form. But I've also, really been truly focused on OT cybersecurity, specifically around protecting critical infrastructure for about the last decade.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know our customers really appreciate your input from a technical standpoint of helping them wade through the various different processes for implementing cybersecurity. So as we always do, we look forward to your input and your feedback and your vision and views from the field as you're implementing these various different technologies across the industry. So again, thank you very much for participation in this event. So a little bit about OPSWAT. So we protect the world's critical infrastructure. As you'll see throughout this presentation, we have various different technologies that provide cybersecurity at various different levels within a customer site. A lot of the different technologies focus on content examination of files, as we're convinced that a file threat might be one of the most important things to guard against. And you'll see in some other slides we have coming up where our various different products sit within an infrastructure. And we can certainly help talk through with any of your staff or your people that need to contact us where these various different products fit. But we're all about protecting critical infrastructure. We're about protecting files. We're about protecting endpoints. We're about protecting networks. And again, you'll see that information as we flow through on this presentation. So the agenda today that we're going to implement is, first off, take a look at the cost of cyber attacks. There's a lot of different expenses that go with cyber attacks, and it might not necessarily just be the fine, but it's the impact on employees. It's the impact on customers, and all of these various different elements that really flow into what do critical infrastructure providers need to prepare for? And then how do you handle the costs, not just monetary costs, but again, employee, customer impacts, supply chain impacts, and things of that nature. So we'll discuss the cost of cyber attacks. Also, we're going to discuss the common challenges. I know in my conversation with customers, they always want to know, what do they need to be worried about? What's the viewpoint that we have from us talking to many different customers around the world? What are the challenges? And then how are they overcoming those challenges? So we'll talk about overcoming those challenges. I'm going to talk briefly about myths and realities. There are some concepts about cybersecurity that really end up being myths. So we'll cover that, make sure that we understand the difference between myths and reality. Then I'm going to talk about our industry-leading technologies, the various different cybersecurity solutions that I mentioned earlier, and really dig into where they potentially fit. And then I think the most important part, and the reason customers come to webinars such as this, is to understand what are the best practices. How are customers really using this technology to ultimately implement cybersecurity solutions that guard against all the various different attacks and challenges and compliance regulations that they need to cover out. So one of the first things that we'll talk about is what are the costs of cybersecurity attacks in the energy and the utility sector? And you all read the papers as much as we do, search the internet to understand these various different attacks. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, again, from a technical standpoint, James, I'll turn to you to discuss some of the technical aspects and some of the aspects that customers have and the questions they ask you about these cyber attacks in the utility sector.
So I guess maybe one of the first questions usually is what kind of malware can we expect to see in an ICS environment? What kind of malware can we expect to see in an OT environment? And the reality is you can see all kinds of it. You can see things that were targeted for financial. You can see things that are targeted for various other industries, but are found in these ICS attacks. So, for example, the German nuclear facility in April 2016, there were a couple of different malwares that were detected, one of which was the Configure worm, and that was discovered on 18 USBs and in a fuel rod modeling system. Well, Configure worm is really about credential stealing and doing things like stealing those credentials and then using them for other operations in the future. So it was really focused towards financial. That was their target. But luckily, at least as far as the nuclear facility, these systems were isolated, so the Configure worm was not able to become activated. To take that a step further, in February of 2021, a water treatment plant was attacked using remote access. So this is that the attacker had active credentials, right? They had real credentials, which allowed them access to a human machine interface, an HMI, and they used that access to change the chemical levels. But again, luckily, this was directly observed and quickly corrected before anyone was harmed. So here's a couple of instances where attacks were there, but they weren't necessarily acted on.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the important things that I think you mentioned on that is that the attackers had credentials and how they gain those credentials through various different file-based attacks, whether it's an email, whether it's a link. That's a topic that we'll certainly need to touch on a little bit later in the use cases, because I think how hackers get that information, how they can potentially social engineer an attack to trick an employee into providing that information becomes a real aspect of how utilities need to guard themselves from these types of attacks. So here's another attack, the Frosty Goop malware. And again, I think, James, you've got some really interesting insights into how an attack like this affects the utility. And in this particular case, they were producing power and steam heat for a particular apartment complex. So what more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so this is an instance where luck runs out, right? So, in the previous slide, we talked about how, somebody kind of caught those things before it was actually acted on. In this particular attack, 600 apartment buildings were without heat for 2 days. And the reason why that was because of this Frosty Goop malware. Now, it ultimately affected those 600 apartments, but it is the first known malware to actually use Modbus. And this is actually unique because Modbus registered data storage locations they require specific knowledge and are, for what that value represents. So just having an arbitrary piece of information saying that this is a Modbus device doesn't give you very much, but understanding what that device is and then going and doing research, which is exactly what happened. They discovered that these devices were there, and they exploited those devices by writing new data to Modbus registers in the ICS system, basically telling the apartment, hey, we're already hot enough, no need to turn on the heat, right? So, and speaking of, when we talk about this particular attack, it was in a Ukrainian heating utility, but Ukraine's not cyber attacks are not new to Ukraine, right? We can go into the 2015 Black Energy attack, which took down the grid for a good majority of its customers, as well as another successful attack which occurred in 2016 in Kiev. So I mean, very much, there's the attackers out there, and they have real impact on real people. I guess maybe, when we talk about the cost of a successful OT cyber attack, it isn't just financial. It has real world impacts on the people, the consumers. So, but maybe let's talk financial.
Yeah, so I think one of the things to say about this is that some of these attacks that we're talking about are pretty high profile, but let's not lose sight of the fact that there's ransomware and malware out there that hit smaller companies on a more frequent basis that never make the news, and they still have some of the same ramifications of the financial impacts. And it's not always just fines. Yes, there may be fines involved, but there's the financial loss or the goodwill with their customers that cause them additional losses beyond just a fine that might happen, right? So because of this, there are compliance requirements, and there's gaps in compliance, or there's regulatory guidance that might not be fully complete. And the energy utility sector has to wade through those various different regulations, various different guidelines for cybersecurity, and determine how cybersecurity solutions fit into their environment. So with that, I think one of the things that's important, and I think your visibility on this, James, is really important, is to understand how customers ultimately are looking to guard against these fines and financial losses with bolstering their cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think compliance, it comes down to, regulatory compliance comes down to making sure that we've got the appropriate logs and records associated to our control, our security controls, and making sure that we're, exercising our due diligence in protecting those systems. So.
Yeah, right. And I think some of the outcomes there in terms of forced shutdowns, I mean, those are extremely expensive, high cost impacts directly to the operator. But I think the reputation that they have with their customers, the reputation they have in the industry, pardon me, is just as important for them to guard against. And I know for a fact that a number of the utilities that I've worked with in the past have absolutely implemented better cybersecurity to meet the regulatory requirements that they're under, but they also do it to implement real world security. So ultimately, their production facilities are better protected. Their manufacturing facilities are better protected to guard their own losses, their fines, and their reputation in the marketplace. So in this particular case, and I know, again, going back to the nuclear side of the house, the nuclear industry implemented mandatory cybersecurity many years ago, back in 2006, 2007. And it's certainly been a long journey for the nuclear power companies to implement regulatory compliance and better cybersecurity. But I think this is another example of utilities that are vulnerable, and they do get hit with fines. Anything additional on this one that you might want to add, James?
Nope. It was this particular one was in the UK, right? And they were fined over 332,000 pounds by the Office of Nuclear Regulation for failing to meet standards, right? So, yeah, yep. There was some analysis that the auditors had performed, which kind of suggested that they could take up to 18 months to recover.
Yeah. Yeah. So whether it's, a NRC requirement or an IAEA requirement, or even a local country requirement for cybersecurity, these all have real impacts because, the government certainly understand protecting this type of critical infrastructure is paramount, because in a case of a nuclear industry issue, right, you have some additional potential fallout there that might be a little bit more catastrophic than just say a fossil or a hydro from a power generation standpoint. So we've got a few more to touch on real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on the various different attacks, because I think that they're all out there. But here's another one where the North American Electric Reliability Corporation imposed fines on a U.S. operator. Why? Because it's very important to protect the bulk electric system as it relates to fossil and hydro production.
Yeah, so to touch on that a little bit, the way FERC and NERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and North American Electric Reliability Corporation, work, at least as far as the fines are concerned, they're looking at things per violation per day, right? So, and they're doing so under the idea of risk level and violation severity level, right? How severe is that particular violation? And some of those violations can be, as little as say $3,600 for a single violation to, $1.5 million per violation per day. Now, the largest fine that's been issued by FERC to date is $10 million. And that was in 2019. Previous to that, it was $1.2 million in 2017. So they're very much taking seriously what's happening in each of these regulated utilities.
Yeah, they definitely are. And I know in all the work that I've done with the utilities here in North America that fall under NERC and FERC, the employees at the power generation stations, they take these regulatory compliance rules extremely seriously. And they're constantly looking for help from industry to understand how customers deploy, how customers mitigate, how customers implement in order to meet the regulatory compliance regulations, as well as provide real cybersecurity that provides ultimate security to their production facilities.
Yep,
So
their
we do
question
appreciate
is,
the hard work that the utilities do in this, because we know we are safer because of the work that they do in order to meet these regulations and provide real security to their production facilities.
yeah, their question is always, how does this help me meet regulatory compliance?
Yep. All right. So we'll touch on one more here out of the EU in terms of some more impact in this regard. Um, I don't know if James, if you can fill us in more on what you know about this particular penalty and what you've seen around the world as it relates to these types of attacks.
Yeah, so this is particularly around the EU's adoption of NIST or NIS2 guidelines. There's a whole bunch of countries in the EU. All of the countries are working on adopting this NIS2 in one way, shape, or form. But the way that NIS2 is looking at it is really focused around either a 10 million euro fine for failure to comply or a 2% of global annual revenue. Right. So they're really looking at it from, if we've got a massive organization, hey, we're going to look at your global revenue and we're going to fine you if you fail in compliance.
Hey, thank you for that insight. So we're going to turn now to common challenges, and this is where I think again is always a question that we get from prospective clients and customers. What is out there that we can help them? And part of helping a customer is to explain what we see in the industry and help them overcome some of these common challenges. And compliance with no traceable records, I know, is the big issue, because as cybersecurity is implemented, as customer policies are implemented, the ability to do an audit trail on the enforcement of those policies and the use of those policies is really important. So, James, maybe you can help us understand a bit about how OPSWAT helps our customers overcome some of these compliance challenges.
Absolutely. So every one of our products has the ability to submit logs, right? So this is to your SIM or whatever that, an event has taken place um, as far as what is going to what reporting needs to happen. But in addition to that, every single file we scan, we're logging what we're doing with it. We're showing where it is being blocked or where it's being allowed, the kind of operations that we're performing on it, and ultimately in things like moving files within an environment, also tracking who accessed that file when.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another issue customers are constantly talking to us about is how do we help secure legacy systems that are older systems that may not be able to be patched and updated. And there's certainly modern threats that really could impact those systems without the right cybersecurity in place. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So we're talking about old technology, stuff that's been around for 30 years. It was built without any proper security controls. and what we have now is this increase in modern attacks and modern threats. So, some of these older systems were never intended to actually be attached to any kind of network, and some of them are even being attached to the internet, which boggles my mind. But the drive for Industry 4.0 and modern digitalization practices really drove that need for connectivity for those systems, because we need to be able to get information and make better business decisions.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, because there's many systems out there that are digital systems that were built before cybersecurity was even a known threat on those systems. So a lot of things to be concerned about. And there's a lot of equipment out there that will remain out there for many more years because they're critical to the production within a modern utility. Inbound hardware. I mean, that's another issue where new things are being added. New hardware is being added. Things that might have a wireless connection that may have been turned on inadvertently, or you might even have a vendor that wants to bring outside hardware in, their own laptop, in order to bring in a file or something to that effect. And I think those are really common concerns and challenges. And OPSWAT has solutions for that. So James, if you could touch on that briefly as well.
Well, one of the things we're not going to be able to do is talk about PLCs that have Bluetooth capabilities. That's just a bizarre thing in general to me. But at the end of the day, we do have products for visibility. We have products to be able to scan vendor laptops as they come into the environment, so that when they touch our control system, those laptops, we have an audit trail of scanning and validation that there was no threats on that laptop at the time that it was scanned.
Right. Yeah. And I think that leads into the next two that are here on the list: the blind transfers, unscanned files going from IT to OT, and unscanned removable media or transit media, which could be the laptop. So definitely solutions for there. And I know, James, you get a lot of questions from customers how to implement these types of solutions to mitigate these challenges.
Yeah, so a lot of these kind of tie together actually, and our technologies help to solve these particular problems. But you're absolutely right. Between unscanned removable media and blind transfers from IT to OT, these are common ways that files are moving into these environments. And let's face it, a majority of the attacks are going to be originating from files. I mean, and blocking those files from even entering an environment is paramount.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. And given the multiple environments that are out there, a particular utility might have 4, 5, 6, 7 or more power generation stations. And so not having a centralized visibility or control can be a problem, a challenge that they need to solve. It can also provide some diversity where everything is not commonly controlled, but it's the inconsistency of security across these sites, or sites that can be so different that a consistent security policy might not be applicable to all sites. And I know you spend quite a bit of time talking to customers about how a product from OPSWAT can help in the consistency of implementing these cybersecurity policies.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things to factor in here. When I think about visibility, visibility kind of translates into blind spots, right? So the real question is, where are those blind spots? What are we not seeing in those environments? Because those blind spots can lead to that inconsistency in security controls. So making sure that we've got good visibility across these assets is critical.
Yeah, it definitely is, because lack of understanding, lack of that visibility obviously creates those voids in the understanding. And that's certainly where a hole can exist. And providing solutions that provide that visibility, consistent control is very important in the industry.
Yep.
So another aspect of the conversations that we have with clients all the time is, what are the myths that are out there? And a number of different myths. We're going to cover a few of them here. But one of the ones that's always out there is, well, we have an air gap, or we have a quote air gap in place. And one of the things that we always talk about is an air gap in and by itself doesn't ensure security, because I know that employees try to get their job done, and sometimes an air gap might make them completing their jobs difficult. And from your angle again on this, James, how do you help customers understand the insecurities around air gap and air gap technology?
Well, so air gaps introduce a major component is it's a frustration for operators, right? How do we get files into the environment, and how do we do it so that we can do our job, as you stated, right? Security engineers are more interested in, okay, so you need to get those files into the environment, but we want to make sure that it's done securely, right? So, air gaps, we can still operate malware, we can still execute malware within the operation environment, and it can still have an impact on operations, regardless of whether or not it can connect to an outside, out to the outside world. We can delete databases, we can do all kinds of bad things with malware that does not require connectivity to the internet or any other network in order to function.
Yep. Yeah. So air gap technology is really important in putting security controls around that and putting policies in place that employees can be educated around to make sure that they follow those policies. Because, you know, we know that customers and their employees want to get their jobs done. And sometimes for various different reasons, not all policies are always followed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, again, to the second point there, field operators always follow policies. Yeah, maybe, I'm guilty of, skirting policy, in order to get my job done because this is what I need to do. But, the policies are there for a reason and they're not always followed. So we need to make sure that we've got controls in place in order to enforce those policies. So they become that policy enforcement point where we plug in a USB, we validate the fact that it's been scanned, not
Right.
just that it has been scanned, but we make sure it has been. And then I guess maybe to the third point here, not having prior incidents, just because you haven't had an incident just means you haven't had an incident yet,
Right.
right? That's really what that's about. I think about this from a security standpoint. I have this idea in my head that is security is always in a state of decay. Things are always going to be working their way towards insecure, right? And so the idea is a constant updating of processes, security controls, policies, reevaluation, and audit of what you're doing internally in order to make the best assessment to what you need to do in an organization. But
Mhm.
just because you haven't had a security incident doesn't mean you're not going to.
Yeah, cybersecurity is not an endpoint. It's a journey, and it's constantly moving. I mean, one of the things that worries me is artificial intelligence, AI for bad. How is that going to change the landscape as AI becomes more prevalent in the industry? And those are things that utilities absolutely need to guard against. So, on that front, right? So, preventative measures are not always enough. And given the journey that the utility and our customers are on, right, being able to continually update those preventative measures, and it's not always just preventative measures, it's the ability to actually stop attacks before they happen.
Yeah. So if you rely exclusively on prevention, can you say that you don't need detection at that point? I mean,
Mm.
this is, yeah, we need detection, we need visibility. I think that these all kind of work together in order to create a more comprehensive solution.
Right.
The concept of internal use ensures data security too, or data safety. This is a big myth. Just because you've got your own laptops that are touching that environment doesn't necessarily mean that an operator didn't have a thumb drive that was in his pocket. He was curious what was on it, or again, back to the USB drop attack. You know, these kinds of things happen, and it may be a trusted asset, but now that trusted asset becomes infected.
Yeah, great. I appreciate the insight on that. Thanks so much. So, we're going to turn now and talk about various different technologies that OPSWAT brings to the marketplace. And there's quite a bit, and we're going to talk about it from two different standpoints. This particular slide is going to talk about the implementation from a standpoint of what the solutions are and the various different buzzwords that are out there for early warning indicators and things of that nature. And then on the next slide, we're going to look at it more from a Purdue model standpoint. So James, given this is industry technology, I'll turn this over to you to speak to some of the major points on this slide from a technology implementation standpoint and how customers use these various technologies to mitigate some of the risks that we've talked about up to this point.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess maybe the first one, when we talk about this first column, prevention, this is back to the idea that, we do need prevention. Anything that we can prevent from entering the environment is something that we don't later have to detect theoretically, right? And so the idea is that we use technologies like deep content disarm and reconstruction. The idea behind that is that we're effectively rebuilding a file based from its original content into a new file and effectively removing objects which may introduce threats into the environment. That could be things like scripts that are embedded into it. It could be malware that's embedded into images. It could be things like URLs and defanging URLs or making them so that they're no longer actionable. And that particular technology is proven 100% effective from SE Labs. So those guys did an analysis and they found that it was 100% effective at protection, and the accuracy was 100% from SE Labs. I guess to take that a step further, when we look at other technologies that we apply to files, we look at things like country of origin. We have the ability to look at vulnerabilities associated to that particular file. So if a file looks like it, is an older version of something where, there are known CVEs associated to that binary or that executable, maybe you as an operator want to block that, or maybe you want to know so that you can put in the appropriate compensating controls. Additionally, things like proactive DLP, so looking at our files and removing things that we don't want to leave the environment, using threat intelligence in order to analyze that file and understand whether or not there are indicators of compromise that are known associated with that file. And then finally, things like our zero-day protection, which is our sandbox technology, where we're able to emulate and examine how a file is going to behave on a particular system before even letting it into the environment. Then we move into the center domain here, what we call device zero trust. So this is assuring device compliance. So this is our endpoint product, which allows for us to examine, is this laptop or is this asset meeting the security policies of the organization? Right, we do that by examining patch management, or what are the patches on that system, what are the applications that are on that system that might be vulnerable, and what do we need to do in order to patch those individual applications. And as a result, we're one of the we're the top vendor of choice for a lot of our customers. So the Palo Altos, the Ciscos, the Avantis. Finally going into detection, which is an important factor as well. We're looking at known threats, right? So the idea here is that we're taking a look with multiple over 30 AV engines on a particular file, and we're doing it simultaneously. We're looking at all of the files that are moving through the environment. We're looking at those with up to, like I say, over 30 AV engines. Right. And when we use that quantity of AV engines, we find that our offline detection rate actually becomes 99.2% detection of known malware. Now, the important thing to understand here is that I said offline, right? So we actually have the ability to support various operations for our customers. We support an on-prem deployment. We support cloud deployments, as well as deployments that live in this air-gapped network. So we can constantly be looking at these files in these OT networks.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate that lead into the next conversation and the next slide here, because now we're going to view some of these technologies from a Purdue model standpoint. And I want to make sure that the audience is not overwhelmed by this slide. And let me explain a little bit about what's going on here. First and foremost, the icons that are in dark blue, these are various different products that OPSWAT has available in the marketplace. So as you can see, as James just mentioned, we start as high as the cloud. And how do we protect files? How do we protect data transfers in the cloud to make sure that endpoints are secure, the files are secure, the communications are secure? We have solutions that deploy in the enterprise, and there's many different solutions that are there. And the one thing I want to make sure the audience understands is as you need help to work through the various different products that OPSWAT has available, our customer success teams are here to help talk through these various different products and understand which ones are really most important in your journey. Because again, this is a cybersecurity journey. This is not an endpoint. So various different solutions can be deployed over time. You also mentioned air gaps. Right, James? So, in this particular slide, we show multiple different air gaps as the segmentation between enterprise level 4 and enterprise level 3, most commonly known to many customers as the DMZ, and various different products that sit there. And then also our products then progress further into the Purdue model stack, into layer 3, the operations network, into layer 2, supervisory control, all the way down into actual process with various different solutions that we can help our customers wade through to understand where they need to apply cybersecurity and then how to apply or how to deploy this cybersecurity. I think the deployment roadmap, James, is one that you can speak to on this particular slide to help demystify some of the challenges that go on here.
Yeah, I think sometimes this slide can become overwhelming, and it can be challenging to understand all of the different technologies that we can employ in the various areas. Really, this slide is to show where the product fits, right? Where they're typically deployed and how they're deployed in a Purdue environment. Probably one of the things to note is that, as we look at, 3, 4, and 5, we're really focused around file security, and we're looking at files that are entering and transitioning between that 4 and 3, or even 3 and 4 boundary. As we start to move lower into it, really starts to become more about the network security, right? The policy enforcement in the network, visibility in the network, seeing what's happening and making sure that there's no anomalies of any communications that are unexpected. But really, even at level 2, you see things like on the left-hand side, our media firewall, which is the ability to validate that a file's been scanned before it's loaded into some kind of a device, whether that's an HMI or other components. So the idea behind this really is, as we're in lower ends of this Purdue model, we're really focused around network security, segmentation, and on the higher end, we're really more focused around the file security, because preventing those malicious files from entering the environment is critical. But if they somehow get in, making sure that we've got the appropriate security controls and technologies in place in order to prevent them from writing to controllers and taking action on objectives.
Right. Yeah. A really important point, because I know you and I, James, are always on the same page that one of the first threats that a utility faces is some form of file compromise, whether it comes in as an email, whether it's a link in a website, something to that effect that is the origination source of an attack. So mitigating file insecurities becomes, in our opinion, certainly one of the first things to do. And then how do you implement additional cybersecurity down the stack? So again, for the audience here, we're not asking you to go this journey alone, but please reach out to us and we can help have a discussion around your particular environment, your security concerns, and help decide which of these different products can help you understand how to continue on your cybersecurity journey. So what we want to move to next, and I think this is a really important part about the solution set, are proven deployments, right? How are customers using these products today? And I know I get a lot of questions from customers all the time that want to know, how are customers using the solution today and who some of those customers are. And so we're going to start first here with a partner of ours, Emerson, right? And many of you know Emerson, a Delta V DCS solution provider that has turned to OPSWAT for a couple of different products. The first piece of it is the MetaDefender Kiosk, again, for file security. And then the second product line they've turned to is the MetaDefender NetWall product line for network segmentation. And so, James, from a technical standpoint, can you give us a quick high-level overview as to where and how some of these products are being used?
Sure. So when we talk about kiosk, we're really talking about looking at USB or removable media. So we're examining files that live on USBs and that might be loaded into a control system or somewhere within the OT environment.
Right.
When we talk about the MetaDefender NetWall, we're really talking about this in a couple of different ways. How can we move files securely into an environment, but also how can we move files securely out of an environment? And I think frequently we see, how do we get DCS data out of the environment so that it can be consumed by the enterprise? And that's where we see products like the MetaDefender NetWall, specifically, in use by Delta V.
Great, thank you. And I think there's some similarities between the use cases here and the next one, which is Hitachi Energy, right? So many of us know Hitachi Energy in the global energy space for power generation. And again, Hitachi has turned to OPSWAT specifically for supply chain security and the delivery of software out to their customers. And on the next slide here, and James, if you can kind of walk us through the scenario of, the challenges of safeguarding supply chain against cyber threats, and, ensuring the security of their global organization and their service engineers to provide software and updates to their customers and mitigate those risks of the supply chain vulnerability. So give us some insights here, James, on how Hitachi uses OPSWAT to implement and guard on some of these challenges.
Sure. So first off, if you ever get a chance to hang out with Jeremy, he's an amazing guy. Absolutely do it. So by all means, I love hanging out with him. But Hitachi ultimately, they don't want to be the source of an event, right? So they're making sure that they're scanning files via the K2100 mobile kiosk in an effort to protect their customers, right? They have service engineers across the globe, and they're using the mobile kiosk to mitigate risk by performing scans of removable media before those files are transferred onto the customer equipment. And through that, they have the ability to, prove that they provided a scan. Here's the files that were moved. This is what they look like, and they were free of any known threats.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the things I'll prelude to the audience here, that you'll see another slide like this very similar from a utility standpoint. Yes, so Hitachi and Emerson want to ensure that their customers are getting known and good and trusted files, having gone through some deep CDR and proactive DLP and multi-scanning to make sure those files are secure. That's great for getting information out of their development environment and into the supply chain. And we'll talk about how customers then use the same type of technology to again check for their own purposes and their own reporting and compliance, that they've also checked those files. So again, you'll see another slide like this, very similar from a utility standpoint. So speaking of utilities, one of the first utilities that we're talking about, again, on the nuclear facility side of things, again, the ability to confidentially pass and share and give information to and from the utility. And one of the things I want to note here on this particular slide is more of the use case story down there on the lower right-hand corner. Certainly feel free to click that link and get additional information on that. So some great comments here from Richard in terms of the security that we provide, the barrier that we put in place to confidently pass information and share information. And on the next slide here, how the Meta Defender drive, and again, I know, James, we talk about transient laptops and things of that nature that need to come in. And again, for the audience, watch the full story on the link down on the right-hand side there to understand how they're using the OPSWAT technologies to guard against multiple different attack vectors. And on the next slide here, we'll give the customers a bit more of a view. And if you can talk us through, James, not only the file transfer sanitization with the kiosk that's shown there on the left, which is a challenge of making sure that files coming in are clean, and then also the transient assets over there on the right-hand side using the drive product from OPSWAT to make sure that the transient assets, the laptops themselves, are secure.
So I guess there's a couple of, there's really actually a lot of technologies in play here. As you mentioned, the kiosk and drive, but also we've got secure managed file transfer. So what's interesting about this really is that we are often asked to examine an organization. It doesn't matter, nuclear utilities. We've had other utilities ask this very same question. We have our own homegrown solution. Bill runs it, right? And my question is, what happens when Bill hits the lottery? Who's going to maintain that? How are those records maintained, right? What does that look like from a compliance standpoint? Or do you have challenges with meeting compliance requirements because you don't have good audit trail for those files that are being scanned? And this was very much the case as far as these guys are concerned. They had a homegrown process. It took a very long time. It was very slow. There was no automation. And what we do is we provide the ability to automate a lot and integrate a lot of the technologies together. So for example, as we see here on the left, we can see that Kiosk is able to move files, scan files and then move files into another environment. But you see that in that level 3.5, we're able to move those files into a secure file transfer. So that's our Meta Defender managed file transfer. And the importance of that is that really, once those files are into that environment, they're available to components on the network to be able to use, knowing that they've been scanned, right? And so we still have an audit trail that the file was scanned from the kiosk. We have an audit trail that the file lives in this managed file transfer. We have an audit trail of who accessed that file when. And in addition to that, we are also scanning that file continuously, right? When I say continuously, maybe a 30-minute interval or what have you, but the idea is outbreak prevention, right? What we're looking for with our Meta Defender Metascan is really known threats. We're saying, is this malware? Is this malware? And knowing that that file had been moved into that environment, if suddenly it does become flagged as malware, now we can go back through the audit logs and see who was accessed, where it came from, and the reason why that file, what systems that file interacted with. And so, really kind of outlining the whole audit trail process that we are able to provide for our customers. But on the transient cyber asset, right, making sure that our contractor laptops or even our organizational laptops are being scanned, we still are maintaining that that scanning capability through our drive. We boot to the drive, we run our scan, we log our scan, create our reports, save them to the drive, and the users are able to upload those into their platforms. That we're also able to manage those through our platform called MyOpsWAT. So really, they're leveraging a lot of technologies here for moving files within their environment.
Great. Thank you for the insight there. And I'm going to move on to the next one here, Omaha Power District, right? Again, and so here on this one, we're going to talk about using the Meta Defender kiosk, again, because file-borne security is a real threat that's out there in the marketplace. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about in the Hitachi use case of a particular diagram, and we're going to go back to that here in just a moment and show you how a utility now uses the same technology to guard for the inbound of that software coming from various different suppliers. And also note again for the audience that you can get more information by exploring the full story directly on opswat.com. So in this particular case, again, right, this diagram here looks much like the Hitachi diagram used. So James, why don't you describe this again from a utility standpoint about how they use this now to guard against the challenges of transferring data, transferring files, audit compliance, and all those various different challenges that we know they run into.
Right. So in the Hitachi use case, where we're saying we don't want to be the supply chain that created this, and so we scan our products or we scan our files before they move into your environment. This is the other side of that, saying you'll scan your files before you move into our environment, and you'll use our so that we can have our audit trail ourselves too, right? And what this really becomes is, as you can see here, a reduction in attack surface by disconnecting. Back to the quote air gap. Disconnecting and reducing the amount of network connections that are occurring between the OT and the IT environment, thereby forcing files to come in through removable media. And by doing so, they've got a couple of options. One, they'll provide the scan, right? Produce the scan for removable media before it enters the environment. And then on the other side, once it's entered the environment, as you see here, we have what we call our media validation agent. That media validation agent makes sure that the file has been scanned, or the files that are available on that USB or that removable media have been scanned and are within policy before they're accessible from the asset. Now, it doesn't necessarily work in all instances, right? I can't necessarily load this software onto this agent onto a PLC, right? And so in those circumstances, there may be a hardware option that can be used for that policy enforcement point. And that's really what this is becoming, is that policy enforcement point that says we've performed a scan, and any files that have been validated and allowed are going to be presented to the asset, whether that's through the agent software, the OPSWAT media validation agent, or if that's through the MetaDefender media firewall.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that insight. And so, the thing to summarize here for the last couple of use cases that we presented is we are talking about getting information across the air gap. And in this particular case here for Omaha Public is how do we get information from an IT environment or higher in the Purdue stack down to the lower levels into the operations network, right? So that's the ability to move information into the OT space. The next couple of use cases we're going to talk about is, well, how do we get data out of the OT environment? How do we get that critical OT production data, reporting data from what's taking place within a plant or within a facility, and get that reporting information out to the IT environment in a way that does not implement or open cybersecurity threats at the boundary between IT and OT? And again, the full use case story is at opswat.com. So please feel free to take that link and follow that and get additional more detail. But one of the things that I want to mention here, and James, you talked about Industry 4.0, which talks quite a bit about OPC communication between machine-to-machine communication. And this particular utility or this particular use case at this oil and gas company is all about getting OPC data, or it could be Modbus data or other type of operational data from a operations network to an IT system. So help us walk through how customers can get that critical data out of a secure OT environment and be able to share that information to the outside users that need access to data, but they don't need access to the network.
Yeah, so in this particular instance where we're taking real-time OPC data access and alarms and events, we're wanting to move that real-time data across that air gap boundary. And the idea here is really so that the enterprise can make better decisions, maybe feeding into an ERP or feeding into a similar system so that they can make better business decisions and planning, really. In this architectural diagram, we can see that we've got an OPC client on the left-hand side, which is retrieving data from our OPC server and feeding that data into our unidirectional security gateway. At that point, is then transferred over to the IT domain unidirectionally, meaning that really what we're doing here is we're sending that data one way, no back channel to come back. We're only sending it one way. And because this product in particular is the unidirectional security gateway, we're also doing guaranteed data delivery. So we're making sure that the real-time data that we're getting from the OT environment is delivered to the IT asset or system that is used to consume it. Now, again, this could be for an ERP, enterprise resource planning platform, or any number of systems which are performing similar functions. Anecdotally, the NetWell is also used often in mergers and acquisitions, right? So where getting data out of, say, an acquired organization is paramount, including things like Historian, right? Pulling Historian data out may be our first primary focus before as we look to integrate in between our systems. We don't necessarily want to merge them. Maybe we want to just get the data that we need out of their system, let them run exactly how they were running before.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the next use case that we're going to discuss here too is similar in that it's an oil and gas environment, a Fortune 500 producer. So a very large organization, and we all know the impacts of global oil and gas supply chain. So various different threats that are out there. And in this particular case, for this oil and gas company, the use case really was around how do we get information out of the lower levels of the Purdue model. And in this particular case, it's actually pulling information from the safety system, that's the trusted network on the left, and moving information to the DCS in level 3, right? So the safety system on the left-hand side here considers anything outside of itself to be untrusted. So how this particular utility was able to move, the oil and gas company able to move information from the safety instrumented system out to the DCS becomes critical, because we know that safety systems are really the ultimate thing that need to be protected in a manufacturing environment.
Yeah, interconnection of safety systems to other systems is just in general a no-no. And I'm pretty sure there are standards written around it that say that it's a bad practice, right? So making sure the safety systems are isolated and protected from any other ability to perform operations or perform actions on those systems is critical. But those safety systems do produce a lot of good usable data that can be consumed by other systems in the environment, other PLCs, DCS, a great example. So it's a very common use case. And in this case, it was the FEND XE15 diode, which actually replaced a firewall. And so I think, when we talk about firewalls, and, firewalls have their place, no doubt about it. In the end, they're possible. Right now, they produce a routable communication between two endpoints. They're subject to things like misconfiguration. And so the FEN diode ultimately for these guys offered the perfect combination both of initial and ongoing cost, because of patching is not necessary as far as these devices are concerned, to produce that security that they need without compromising their trusted network.
Right. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you bring up here, and I'll touch on it briefly, again, there's a lot of conversation that we can have with customers or prospective customers about how these different technologies, certainly in the realm of an optic diode, are dramatically different than that of a standard software firewall. And people should know that we have an industrial firewall here at OPSWAT. So we have multiple different technologies, as you saw on that Purdue model slide. And the implementation of different technologies really depends on the threats that you're looking to mitigate. And so again, to the audience, we're not asking you to do any of this research on your own. Rather, reach out to us so we can have these conversations and explain the differences in a bit more detail. All right, well, given the time constraints, we're going to move to one last use case, and then we'll wrap up here. And this is a water utility. And we all know how important water utilities are, whether they're traditional water utilities, water, wastewater, or desalination facilities and things of that nature. Cybersecurity is incredibly important because water is an essential part of the critical infrastructure. And so the ability to protect water systems and provide secure data transfer, that real-time visibility and secure remote access into these facilities at times can be a challenge, and we certainly have solutions. So James, here on the next slide, if you can walk us through again a bit, and this one's a bit more complex because there's multiple different use cases here, but again, providing real solutions to mitigate threats and vulnerabilities at a water site.
Yeah, so I think it's important to highlight the fact that, as we look at each of these individual use cases and we apply them to that previous 5-layer Purdue
Mhm.
model, that in the end, the effect is we're utilizing different technologies, or, illustrating how those different technologies are used in those environments. And so this one's no exception. The reality here is there's several implemented technologies, including Metadefender OT security for OT asset visibility and real-time monitoring.
Mhm.
The visibility tool provides anomaly detection as well as some ICS vulnerability management. We also see here Metadefender OT access, for secure remote access to those OT assets for system updates and various support reasons. But this ultimately ensures that users are only permitted access to the specific protocols and assets on that control system network. So we have the ability to finally tune, exactly which particular asset a given user is actually able to access, not only from the use of that asset, but also the protocols that are allowed communication between those endpoints, right, between the engineer and that control system asset. So, and then, finally, we've got an implementation of the Metadefender industrial firewall, right, using deep packet inspection for enforcement of industrial protocol communications. So the thing that's unique about these particular firewalls is that they can learn the type of communications occurring on the wire and then dynamically help write those deep packet inspection rules, ultimately helping engineers and operators by reducing the possibility of human misconfiguration, right? Because at the end of the day, we all know, and this is something I usually ask, right? How many rules does it take to misconfigure a firewall? The answer is one, right? That one rule that says any, right? And
Yep.
so this helps the operators to configure firewalls quickly. It helps them to understand what exactly is occurring on their network and validate, these communications make sense. And it's doing it from a deep packet inspection standpoint.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of things going on in this particular use case. And with that, I want to thank the audience for their participation here. And I want to leave you with a couple of last things. One, we're not looking for you to figure out how to use these various different solutions on your own. So please reach out to us. Get started with OPSWAT. You've got the code there that you can scan. You can go to our website. You can reach out to myself and James. We can certainly help you. And then there's, around the world, many other staff that are in place to help you on this journey. So again, thank you very much for your time and attention, and we appreciate your audience. Thanks so much.